One of the most useful additions you can have on a fishing kayak is an anchor trolley system, so that you can anchor up either from the stern or the bow really easily. Now I've just redesigned the system on my prowler, so I thought it would be a good idea to do a little video of how to put one together and also talk a little bit about the difference between quick release and non-quick release methods and which one is best in which situation. So we'll get cracking and first of all look at what needs to go on.
So here's the kit you'll need. A length of rope that is twice the length of the kayak and some way of connecting the anchor line to the trolley rope. If you're using the quick release method, then something with a gate is needed. If not, stainless steel ring or a black nylon ring work well. You'll need a cleat to lock the trolley rope in position and 2 pulleys, 2 stainless steel carabiners and then 2 pad eyes, one for each end of the kayak. I'm using stainless steel ones, but the nylon ones work well as well. You'll need some way of attaching those and the cleat to the kayak. I'm using these things, which are trifold rivets. You can use screws or bolts if you can get to the other side of the kayak, or these things, which are well nuts. I'm not a big fan of these because they're made of rubber. They tend to slip around a bit when you initially put them in. And also, over time, the rubber degrades and then they start to leak. So I really do prefer to use something like the trifold rivets. In order to put a bit of cushioning into the trolley system, a couple of bits of bungee are useful for either end of the kayak. And then there's this thing, which is a stainless steel bracket that I'm going to use to attach the trolley system to my rudder, rather than using one of the pad eyes, because that way it will be as far back as possible. This is, as I said, is made out of stainless steel, but you can use that high density plastic that some chopping boards are made of. That works equally as well. So there's the kit. Time to start getting it on the kayak. So the first thing I do is with a marker pen mark out where I want the front pad eye to go. Now this should be as far forward as possible and ideally below the gunnel, but because of the shape of my prowler, if I put it down here it will be upside down. So that would have to do. So now I've got it marked out, I take an electric drill and put the holes through. One, 2. Put a little bit of sealant around it. Don't need to go mad. Just enough to make sure there is plenty around it. Take the eye with the rivets and pop it into place. Like that. Out comes the rivet gun. Goes on there. Tighten it up and eventually one more click comes off. And then we do the same with the other side. Tightens up. And off it comes. Then what I like to do is just put a little bit of sealant in the top as well, just to seal off the hole, to make sure no water can drip inside. Wipe off the excess, and we're good to go. So here's the pulley at the front of the kayak. I've got the piece of elastic attached to the carabiner, and then finally the pulley. Now the piece of elastic isn't essential. All it does is put a little bit of cushioning into the trolley system. And you can have it at either end of the kayak, both or not at all. But if you're going to have it at just one end, I think it's worth having it at the opposite end to whichever end you usually anchor up at. That way your anchoring point is going to be as far towards the end of the kayak as possible. Now if I was going to use a pad eye at the back, it would be exactly the same process as the front. As far back as possible, and preferably below the gunnel line. But I've put my plate in so that I can attach the rudder system to the anchor trolley. I've got a hole that's about 4 inches away from the centre, and all I'm going to do is thread the elastic through with the carabiner and the pulley, through there. And I've also got one of these little knot protectors on, so I'll pop that on and tie it off. As I said, mine's made of stainless steel, but you could quite easily use a thick chopping board, thick plastic chopping board. Does exactly the same job. Slide that in. And there we go. So with the pad eyes attached at either end, it's now time to fit the cleat in. As you can see, mine's sitting just behind the seat and it's attached exactly the same way as the pad eyes. So a couple of rivets through and then a bit of sealant to hold it nice and watertight. And that's all it is. Once this is done, it's time to fit the trolley rope. So to one end of the trolley rope I've attached the carabiner. Then I take the other end and at the stern of the kayak take the other end and pass it bottom to top through the pulley, and then along the side of the kayak. At 2 or 3 points I've got these twisted D-rings. They just help to stop the rope from riding up into the seating area, but any more than that and it tends to put a bit too much friction on the rope. Then we get to the other pulley, and this time it's top to bottom, and I'll tie on another loop so that it's ready to attach to the carabiner along the side of the kayak, and there we go. And as you can see, it slides nicely along. So we'll get it out onto the water and talk a little bit about the difference between quick release and non-quick release and which is best in which situation. Right now I'm anchored up with the quick release method. I've got a length of rope that is attached to the trolley carabiner, and that leads to a buoy which is connected to the dive reel, and that leads to the anchor. Now if I want a quick release for whatever reason, either to chase a fish or to release a lure for a snag or to talk to a mate, all I have to do is bring the carabiner to where I'm sitting and release, and I'm away. And that works really well if I'm on a river or where there isn't a big tide. But there is a downside to it. I'll reconnect to the buoy and we'll have a look at it. Now I'm doing this in a weir because it's only about 5 or 6 feet deep here, so I haven't got that much warp out. But if I was in a fast tide, I might have 4, 5, 6 times the depth out as warp. When it comes to reeling in the trolley, I have to pull myself to a position where I can get hold of the dive reel. And as you can see, I'm starting to pull round broadside, and that's the most dangerous position you can be in. So if you've got a lot of warp out, even if you attach the dive reel line to the trolley and move it out, you're at broadside for a lot longer than is really wanted. So in those sort of situations, if you are in a fast tide, it's much safer to use the non-quick release method. So I'll have a look at that now. The anchor goes over the side as normal, but instead of a length of rope attaching to the trolley, the dive reel does, and then that gets shifted into position as normal. And as you can see, we're starting to turn around. Now it's not quite so easy to free yourself up once you're connected, so you can't disconnect and reconnect quite so easily if you wanted to come back to the same mark. But it does have other advantages. Now if I want to pull the anchor up, all I have to do is uncleat, send it to the bow and then pull up. At no point do I have to pull anything up from broadside. There's another advantage as well. With the dive reel staying on board, I can cleat that up right next to me. Now in a real emergency, if I need to get rid of that anchor as quickly as possible, all I have to do is reach for the knife and cut at the cleats. So it's really, really fast, and I did that with only one hand. So if you're in a fast tide, it's much, much safer to use the non-quick release method.